This video is brought to you by the 3-Minute Board Game patrons. Keep us independent by supporting us on Patreon. Kia ora koutou, and welcome to this review of The Feast of Hemlock Vale. This is our fourth in our ongoing series of recaps of the campaigns for Arkham Horror, the card game. Previously, we've done the Return to Carcosa, the Scarlet Keys, and the Innsmouth Conspiracy. And if you want to check out those reviews, they're available here on the channel. I'm going to start off with a short, spoiler-free review before moving on to a bunch of spoilers. I will signpost when that's about to happen. If you know nothing about the Feast of Hemlock Vale, just know that your group has been invited along as part of an expedition to explore wildlife on this island. It just happens to be the same time they've opened up the island, which is normally closed off, to a festival. So there's going to be lots of people roaming around the village with masks on and flowers in their hair, doing strange ritual things while you're conducting your survey. And that combination of isolated island village life with strange monsters in the forest at night is what sets the backdrop for this whole campaign. Unlike most of the earlier campaigns, A Feast of Hemlock Vale only lasts for 6 scenarios. And you do get some options on how those scenarios are chosen and what order you do them in. The final mission is always the final mission, but how you get there can change each time you play. That said, I would not recommend this to people who are just getting into Arkham Horror the card game. I personally think The Feast of Hemlock Vale is an expert level set. There's a lot of really rough scenarios in here, and a lot of situations where if it's your first time playing through, you're probably going to end up having a pretty gruesome time. For people who've been playing Arkham Horror a lot, absolutely, this is a set you'll enjoy. Just know that at some points it gets pretty difficult, and if you're still finding your feet with the game, it just might not be for you. I'll give some advice later on in the video on how I tooled up to finally beat the campaign on my 4th attempt. It took me 4 goes at A Feast of Hemlock Vale to get through the finale. And I don't think I'm super bad at this game, but it did take a lot of thinking and a lot of tuning my decks to fill very specific needs in order to get through the campaign effectively. I'll talk a lot more about that later in the video. So that's probably the end of the spoiler-free section, and even that contained what some people would consider spoilers. But let's talk about the campaign overall. Its setting and inspiration. So clearly this is inspired by the H.P. Lovecraft story, The Color Out of Space, which is about a farm where a meteorite lands and terrible things start happening to the farm. The livestock starts getting mutated and growing gigantic. The crops get ruined, and just there's a blight that comes across everyone and everyone goes mad, and it's all awful. If you don't want to read the short story, there is a recent film starring Nicolas Cage, and whether you find that enjoyable or not probably has a huge amount to do with how much of Nicolas Cage you can handle acting at any given time. Because he makes some very, very strange acting choices in the movie. And if you like Nicolas Cage, you'll probably find them endearing, but yeah, it was a little much. So that forms the core inspiration for the campaign. But there's definitely another inspiration in there, and that's sort of the folklore horror of things like Midsummer. Hence the flowery crown I am wearing right now. The idea of a secluded island where people have their own little cultures, their own festivals, and those festivals take a dark turn is another part of the Feast of Hemlock Vale. So it sort of takes the idea of The Color Out of Space and merges it with that sort of folklore horror genre. I'm going to take this off now because it's actually quite scratchy. The campaign structure is really neat. There are 3 days and 3 nights, and you play them through in sequence. And on the first day, you get to choose from any one of these 5 scenarios to go and do. And it's your choice which one of them to do. In the evening, you can either have the set evening scenario that happens on the first night, or you can do one of the 4 of the 5 scenarios you missed. There's an opportunity cost of doing that. You'll end up with a worse chaos bag, and you might miss out on some other things if you go that way. But it's a choice you can make. On the second day, you'll do one of the remaining standard missions, and then again, in the evening, you'll have the choice of the night mission, or doing one of the standard missions. And then third day is the same, aside from you get no choice on the night of the third day, you always go to the finale. And I think this campaign structure is really cool. How they designed the different scenarios, so different things would happen at different days. So different people will be at different locations on different days or evenings. So if you're trying to follow an individual character's story, you have to go at a certain time and listen to the clues of where they're going to be. And this day structure ties into the residents of the island really well. So the residents are the suite of about 10 characters that you need to get to know. Well, you don't need to get to know, but it's probably in your interest to get to know and form relationships with them. Having strong relationships with people in the village will help you out. You'll be able to bring them onto your side through the course of the campaign. And if one of them goes, I'm off to the mines today, you should probably go to the mines to make sure that they're okay, if you're actually interested in keeping that particular character alive. So the use of the resident characters and how they structure the campaign overall and change the scenarios so that each day they're a little bit different keeps this campaign quite fresh. So I've done scenarios where I've done it on the first day or on the third day, and they have felt quite different. Then we come on to Preludes, and Preludes are something that are introduced in the Feast of Hemlock Vale, and they're sort of like an expanded narrative introduction. So you set up the board of the village as you would a normal scenario, but there's no mythos deck, and generally there's very low risk of anything potentially bad happening. You don't get to mulligan, and you go around for a couple of turns meeting the villagers and doing things in the village. And I thought the first time through that these were really neat. I thought that the preludes are really cool. You could customize and build up your hand and have one asset in play ready to go when you started the campaign, the scenario proper. And I thought that was really cool. Then I played it through the second, third, and fourth times, and they get old really quickly. I think they were done this way based on the feedback from the Scarlet Keys, having too much reading in it. But I found that this took way longer than getting through the narrative bits of the Scarlet Keys. You had to do all the setup, move the characters around, do all that kind of stuff for what it is essentially just a narrative prelude. And it's the same each time, really. And especially the first one, you get to know where everyone is really quickly. And if you need to know what you need to do, you just go through and do it. And yeah, I don't think there's much there in the end. And it also leads into one of... it's hard to call this a problem, but it's a feature of the campaign. And that is that the daytime scenarios are really quite easy, and the nighttime scenarios are not. So you get these preludes when you're playing the day scenarios, which are naturally just easier. They're easier scenarios in general. The 5 default scenarios, none of them are what I would call brain-meltingly hard scenarios. In fact, most of them very middle of the road. Even on day 3, they're all very, very doable by reasonably competent characters. But you get this whole prelude to tune up for them. So you start with, like, if you're running a shotgun deck, you can get your shotgun out most likely ready to go at the start of that scenario, and probably have an extra ammo card in hand and a few other bits and pieces that you're ready to, start blasting things to Kingdom Smeg in a relatively easy scenario. So you do all this work to build up the perfect hand to play a scenario where you probably just a random selection of cards. You're probably going to do okay anyway because they're not that hard. And then you go to the night scenarios, and they are all 3 of them are really, really challenging. The first one on night 1 is what I would consider a tough, challenging scenario. The other 2 are off the chart. They are 2 of the hardest scenarios I've played. It took me, as I say, 4 goes to get through those. And the first time we went to the longest night, the second night scenario, we just got completely bodied, absolutely smashed to pieces. Everyone resigned with half of the scenario to go. It was something else. And so this creates this up down thing throughout the campaign, where easy, lethargic sort of day scenarios and frantic night scenarios which you don't get to prepare for. And I just feel the balance there is a little bit out. I would probably have preferred if the day scenarios had been just a little bit tougher, to be honest. The night scenarios do give you something to work towards, and they do definitely say, hey, here is a skill. You need to be this good at the game to continue this ride when you play the longest night. And it definitely checks you if you are not up to that level once you get to that scenario. But Preludes for me, ton of busy work and not needed. And the scenarios where you really needed that extra prep work, you just don't get them. That said, the Codex system that they use through this campaign is really clever. Printing on the card for a character that gets reused through a ton of scenarios, a little identity number. And then based on the scenario you're playing, you check the specific entry for that scenario based on where they are. So one character could have entry 1 on them, and that entry could be triggered in multiple different stages in the campaign. It just means you don't have to go look up reference 119 or reference 122 or print a different card for each resident each time they're used. It simplified and streamlined things very, very well and made looking stuff up in the book really quite simple. I think the Codex is definitely a keeper and something they should use here on out. If there's a recurring character, just print their Codex number on them, and whenever you're at the appropriate time in the scenario and you need to check that Codex, you flick through the book and you find it. I think that's really good. Codex, excellent addition to the campaign. So here we are to the advice I have learned through 4 playthroughs, one of them successfully. So my successful playthrough group was Harvey Waters, who was doing a lot of cards and getting his book number very, very high and doing a bunch of things to just get lots and lots of clues. Advanced fingerprint kit, high deductions, allies that boosted his book. He was out there just basically accumulating clues and handing out cards to other players. The second character was Leo Anderson, who had a ton of allies to use as meat shields, a shotgun, try to get his big shotgun numbers up very high so he could do hideous damage to things, plus also Brand of Cthulhu, which will be very important when I mentioned later on. Having that was a big cornerstone to the campaign. And finally, a Skids O'Toole of all people, who was playing a dirty fighting agility-based deck with a little bit of clue getting from Thieves' Kits in there. But mostly, Skids was there to deal with evading things and then doing quite a bit of damage. Because in this campaign, the first bit of advice, there are way more monsters than you can possibly deal with in a lot of the scenarios. You'll get big, high health creatures coming at you, left, right, and center. You'll draw like a 10 health worth of critters a turn, some turns, and be like, oh, okay, how am I going to deal with 10 health worth of critters in one turn? And you need to do a lot of damage to the ones you can, and you need to evade the ones you can't. Even my Seeker was running a bunch of combat stuff with the Ravenous Myconid and the event card, whose name escapes me, that can do up to 4 damage if you've got a lot of clues on you. Tons and tons and tons of damage and monster mitigation. I'd also recommend getting cards that allow you to taunt things or deal with aloof and elusive, because these critters are going to take actions for you to engage them, and then they're going to run away from you as well. There was a Riot Whistle, I think it is, a card on Leo that he got that gave him a free taunt action each round. That got so much use. That card was essentially just giving Leo a bonus action for most of the campaign. Became incredibly useful card, and yeah, I didn't even need to upgrade it or anything. He just sat with that through the whole campaign because, yeah, an extra action's a really good thing to have. And in some of the scenarios, you're going to be fighting every single turn against big, scary things. The next thing is so many of the treachery cards or the mythos cards in the deck go after your cards in your hand. There'll be a lot of other effects on the tokens that say if you lose, discard cards. And there is a particular treachery that can end up in front of you that does 5 horror, I believe, if you run out of cards. So there's a lot of stuff that attacks your cards in hand. That's one of the reasons why I ran Harvey, so he could boost a bunch of card draw and, not just keep it all for himself. He was actually helping the other characters keep their hand sizes up as well. So lots of things go after your hand and just try to make you discard cards. And when you run out of cards, you get smashed. So plan for that. Sort of my last point for dealing with the campaign is magical damage. There are a couple of monsters out there in the campaign that just can't be hurt by regular weapons. And I'm not saying like they take only one damage or whatever. They just can't be hurt at all. If you don't have a spell like Brand of Cthulhu, that's it. You can't get rid of these creatures through the game unless you have ways and means to do magical damage to them. Kind of a dick move when you first come across them, because you're like, cool, I guess we'll have to evade that every turn or just deal with the consequences. Which is, I get why these things are in Arkham, but when you first come across them, they just make you go, whoa, and you kind of have to tech for them. You have to build your deck with them in mind the next time you go through. Because the Feast of Hemlock Vale first playthrough is it's brutal, absolutely brutal. Like, these are my lessons learned from going through it several times to see what works. The first time through, we didn't have any of this, and we got, as I say, we got spanked. We got spanked hard. So I'm just going to go through the scenarios one by one, and I'll just give you a couple of thoughts on them. The first one, Written in the Rock. This takes place in a mine, and the highlight of this one is you move the locations around to change the tracks on the rail cart, and if you end up having the rail cart hit a wall, you all die. So you're having to gain clues and do stuff to move the train around. Really fun scenario. I think this is one of the funnest, neatest designs I've seen so far at Arkham. Each time I played it, it's brought a smile to my face. Makes me think it's a better idea than the Horror and High Gear. It's a similar sort of idea that you're traveling and you can't really get out and do an awful lot, but I think they executed it way better here. I think Written in the Rock is just really neat. A good, solid, fun time. Hemlock House is a cool scenario that does stuff with locations. One thing I digged in this was that the locations are the monsters, and if you burn down the house, it starts collapsing. Really fun, very different sort of scenario to the others, because it's the only one that really happens inside. I mean, some of the others happen underground, but this one's sort of the only house that you come across through the whole campaign. So it feels very different to the other scenarios. The Silent Heat's probably my least favourite scenario in this set, because you can kind of just get in, do what you need to do, gather a lot of clues and get out without triggering off any of the alarms or having to fight the baddies. It really is a scenario where how fast can you gain clues, and if that answer is real fast, then there's not a lot of threat here. I think of all the scenarios, this is the one I think is the most mid. The Lost Sister is a really good time. One of those scenarios where you're exploring and just adding stuff and trying to find things, and then you get the final encounter with the baddie. And this is just a really neat boss fight, because the critter behaves differently when it's in the light or whether it's in the darkness, and it tries to retreat back to darkness. And so you've got to try and lure it out, attack it, and it's a very cat and mouse kind of game with this giant monster. Lost Sister's a really good time. Definitely one you should check out and play. And the final one of the day scenarios is The Thing in the Depths. And I've only done this one on day one. I've done it twice on day one. And it felt a little easy. Like you could maneuver the creature you need to rescue around the board pretty easily while just, attacking the Thing in the Depths once or twice to make it run away. I think hunting the thing down and killing it would be a real big challenge, but I don't think you need to do that to win the scenario. Looking at how the scenario is written, though, I think this would be quite a bit more challenging on day 3, as the basic tentacles that pop up and try to attack the creature you're trying to rescue get way tougher. Then we have the night scenarios, and the first one is the Twisted Hollow, which is a bit of a messy scenario as it really comes over 3 acts. So you're exploring the forest, and as you do stuff, the various bits of the forest will fall away and get reshuffled. So it's trying to make you feel like you're getting lost in the woods. But it goes through 2 resets. So the first time you find a clue, and then an evil bear turns up and you run away, and then you have to reset and do it again. And essentially the second act, you know that the location you need to go to is in the bottom 4 cards. So you just kind of beeline in a line until there's only 4 cards left, and then start looking there. So that part of the scenario is pretty straightforward. And then the third part is a sort of set arrangement, and you've got to ideally kill the bad guy, kill the big evil bear, and then find the way out. Which could be the first location you turn over, or it could be the last location you turn over. And that dramatically changes how difficult the scenario is. One time we played it, it was literally the last scenario, the last location that we could uncover was where we needed to go. Another time I played it, it was the third location I turned over. So I think this scenario, while it's quite interesting and it does create the feeling of being lost in the woods really well, can skew really dramatically. The game length can be very, very dramatically different. Again, if in that final bit, the very first location you come across is the way out, it's going to play out very differently than if you have to explore the whole forest. The Longest Night was absolutely crazy the first time we played it. And if you haven't played this one, what really makes it stand out is that not only is there an encounter deck which has horrible, horrible, horrible treacheries in it that you have to draw, you also have to draw from a monster deck each turn. And these monsters will spawn at the perimeter of the map and just start moving in. And these monsters are all quite tough. Like the weakest of them is pretty weak, but there's some 5 health critters in there. Plus you have a souped up giant killer bear who's roaming around trying to eat your face. This is a scenario where you have to use defensive tactics. You have to use a lot of the scenario features of putting in decoys, barricades, and traps to slow down the critters, but you also need buckets of firepower just to stop them from getting to the center and eating the things you're protecting. First time we played this through, we were not tooled up to fight remotely this well. We didn't have a trio of characters that were tooled out for a big slogging fight like this, and we just got overwhelmed. We ended up resigning on turn 6 because otherwise we're all going to get murdered. Even with the right tooled up characters that I had the 4th time I took a crack at this, it was still touch and go. Still touch and go until about turn 8, where I was like, okay, I think we're pretty comfortable here. For this scenario, to win it, you need to deal a ton of damage. And you need someone picking up clues as well in order to put down the barricades and everything else. But yeah, monster management off the chain here. And even then, there's a couple of treacheries in the encounter deck that activate all the monsters and move them again. And a badly timed one of those can throw the game for you as well. I had the good fortune of all but one time I drew this card, it went to Skids, who had like 7 feet at the time. So these tests were relatively easy to do. But I think if we'd failed those 3 tests, even kitted up and ready for it, we probably still would have lost that scenario. Longest Night's real challenge. But that's good. Arkham needs challenges like this. It needs scenarios that make you go, ooh, that smarts. Because it's the only way you're going to get better at the game. And if it was all cakewalk, it wouldn't be a lot of fun either. And then we get to the finale, which I have a few problems with, but mostly just due to how it's structured. I think the finale could almost have been 2 scenarios. You've got like a prelude that you do that isn't really a prelude. Then you've got this whole phase where you lose your character temporarily and are given a temporary character, and you have to sort of recover your memories as a sort of the framing for it. By doing a lot of investigations and succeeding a lot of checks. Because the more you succeed, the more cards you get to look at, the more likely you are to find your character card and get back to doing what your character does so well. The thing is, once you get through that, and that is a pretty chunky part of the scenario as well, you then have to do a reset of the board and then set up the village again. So there's like setup for the prelude, then setup for the first part of the finale, and then setup again for the second part of the finale. It's a lot, and in the sessions we run, it's pushing the amount of time we've got to actually play through one campaign. So I just feel like maybe it could have been split as 2 scenarios, and there's nothing wrong with splitting it up as 2 scenarios, because it just felt a little too much. The finale's got some cool stuff in it. I think the Abyss deck and how that all works is very interesting and novel. I was slightly miffed to lose my character the first time through, but you know, it's a challenge. You know, the first time through the campaign, I was kind of a little bit by it because of how badly bodied we got, and how badly smacked over we got. But the more I've thought on it, the more I've gone, that's probably a good thing. You probably shouldn't win a campaign the first time through unless you're really cheesing it. You should probably go and get your face smacked a couple of times before you get into a campaign. Otherwise, the box won't have any longevity. It won't have a challenge to it. And as I said, I won this playing through on my 4th time. That was on Tabletop Simulator, and that was me playing all 3 characters. I still have to play this through and win it in person, which is a very different thing. So yeah, the finale, it's interesting, it's different, it's challenging, it's thought-provoking. I just feel like it may be just too much. Like, either do something with the prelude and make that less setup, or just do a narrative prelude, because having to do 3 setups was just a little too much for one campaign. Sorry, for one scenario. So yes, that's my conclusions on the Feast of Hemlock Vale. I think this is a very good campaign. I just think it's an expert campaign. I would not recommend this to new players for Arkham Horror. I think they should definitely try Dunwich or Carcosa or Innsmouth or something else before coming to Feast of Hemlock Vale. It's, I think, the hardest campaign I've tried so far, and we've done Dunwich, Carcosa, Scarlet Keys, and Innsmouth, and Feast, and I think Feast is probably the toughest one of those. That may have just been our experience getting our ass handed to us that first time, but that was an ass kicking. We're currently playing through The Circle Undone, so the next video in this series will be for The Circle Undone. And until that time, thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, hit the notification button, like, share, and subscribe to the channel.